Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Okay guys, it is time to wrap up my reading for the month of July, and I read so much this month. I read 32 books in 31 days. I think a lot of that is because I was able to get my Kindle Unlimited subscription renewed. It was coming back up for $0 for 2 months. So that's the kind of math I like. So I had some shorter things that I got through. I found some new Kindle Unlimited authors. But yeah, I think in general, I am thriving in this new, like, hey, a lot less restrictions on what you should be reading kind of situation. And I actually made a lot of progress on arcs. And then I just did some mood reading and catching up with things that I'd been meaning to get to that had kind of just gotten pushed a little bit to the side. So I'm really excited for the momentum, and like, this was a really good reading month. It started off a little rocky, we will talk about it, but overall I really liked the things I was reading. And yeah, I'm hoping I can take this momentum into August. My goal is that in August, I'm going to read most of the rest of the arcs that I have for the rest of the year. And then that will be great because then after Labor Day, when I'm pivoting back to kind of focusing on challenges again, I will have a good chunk of things I have to read taken care of, and I can still kind of keep this up where I do have some structure to the reading, but then also, you know, just a lot of mood reading happening. So anyway, I have 16 of those 32 books that I want to talk about, at least briefly, so I should probably try to just go ahead and get to that. So we'll do quickly some stats and stuff, and then we will focus mostly on my hits, my disappointments, and my surprises. So in terms of overall stats, like I said, I read 32 books this month. 22 of them were owned by me, and 10 of them came from either the library or Kindle Unlimited. I read a total of 8,415 pages for an average page count of 263 pages. The average age of the book that I read was 7 years, which is not as good as I would like. And the average amount of time it had been on my TBR, though, was only 6 months. So that is a good little metric there in alignment with what I like to see. 28% of books that I read this month I paid for, and I on average paid $1.50 for those books, either because they were super on sale or because of a lot of the books I read were ebooks. But I think a big part of what was bringing down my total average cost is the fact that I got so many of these books for free this month. And in terms of like where books came from, the biggest chunk were from publishers this month. 9 of them were from publishers. So that was bringing the average down. In terms of genre, the biggest genre, which is pretty typical for me, was some version of contemporary romance. And if you factor in historical romance or speculative romance on top of that, that was the biggest chunk, which makes sense. I tend to sort of pace my reading as I read something light, then I read something a little weightier, or I have some of the weightier things or bigger, harder to get through things kind of going in tandem. So that always tends to be where things are weighted. But this month, interestingly, my next biggest category was mystery, which hasn't been true for a while. I was definitely, some of this was the arcs that I was reading, but I was definitely in the mood for mystery this month. So that was my next biggest category, followed by like fantasy, all the different kinds of nonfiction, and then a little sci-fi, a little historical fiction thrown in there. And then finally, in terms of average rating this month was 3.47 stars. Great. And a pretty even distribution with the main chunk of books being in the middle. I had 11 3 stars. I had 1 1 star, 4 4.5 stars. So nice little bell curve, it looks like, happening this month, weighted a little more towards higher ratings. I think that's most of the stats I need to tell you about. I mentioned previously that I'm not really doing a lot of challenges right now. The only thing I'm doing is I am keeping track of how I'm doing on the Ripped Bodices Summer Romance Bingo board. So I'm actually doing pretty well. I got 2 almost bingos going right now. Side note there. But other than that, yeah, just mostly mood reading or reading from my ARC pile. So those were all the stats and challenges and whatnot. Let's get into talking about 16 books. For ones that I've already mentioned a little bit, I think I'm gonna try to keep it pushing, keep it moving. So I'm gonna try to get through this and not make this a million years long, but I just had a lot of things to tell you about this month. Okay, so let's start with disappointments. I had 3 things I wanted to call out. So one, I already talked a little bit about this in my mid-month check-ins, so I'll mostly just refer you to that. But I did want to mention that I did find The Secret Adversary by Agatha Christie to be ultimately disappointing. I gave it 3 stars, like in the scope of things I have read in my life. It was fine, it was good. I just, you know, it's the first in a series for her, a, you know, famous detective duo, Tommy and Tuppence. And I was hoping I was going to like it more. And the bottom line is it was fine, but not my favorite and not something that made me super excited to get into the rest of the Tommy and Tuppence oeuvre. I don't know. We'll see kind of how that pans out. Another disappointment I had was a category romance that I actually pre-ordered because I was like, oh, I really like this author and this sounds like a description I'll really like. And it was Fling with Her Hotshot Consultant by Kate Hardy. And my disappointment here is that it says explicitly fling, and it's set in the Scottish Highlands with like a hot Scottish doctor. There's like a exchange program and like a doctor from London, or is it a doctor consultant? She's a registrar. Yeah, I've learned these terms from category romance. A registrar in pediatrics from London is job swapping with someone in Glasgow, I think, or Edinburgh. And her consultant ends up being her roommate as a part of the like house and job swap. But also, I thought they were going to be getting it on the whole time because it says fling, but they don't even like come out and admit they have feelings to each other till towards the end. There's only like one kind of sexy scene. It's just like I felt like it under-delivered the fling bit of the titular Fling with Her Hotshot Consultant. So anyway, that was a little disappointing. 2 stars. It was fine and it was a quick read, but I wanted more flinging. When I tell you the most disappointing book I read this month and the most disappointing book I read this year, the book that actually made me think that this was not going to be a very good reading month, the book that I read a 600-page Pride and Prejudice fan fiction afterwards to try to get it out of my mind, was The Wrong Mr. Darcy by Evelyn Lozada. Now here's the deal. Normally, I would not really go out of my way to tell people like, please don't pick this up, but there's like layers of why this book ended up annoying me. And I want to mention this was an ARC, so I do appreciate the publishers giving me the chance to review it early and to tell you why I don't think you should read this book. I think if you watch this channel, if you know me, there's very few things I'm like, just don't read this. But this is one I just don't think people should read for several reasons. First, it is called The Wrong Mr. Darcy, and the back of this cover strongly indicates that this is going to be a Pride and Prejudice retelling. Well, folks, I am here to tell you, it is barely, like, it doesn't really qualify as a Pride and Prejudice retelling, okay? Like, there is a Mr. Darcy. There are some of the sort of misunderstanding to love elements thrown in there. That does, I guess, but like, if you are looking for a Pride and Prejudice retelling, this is not going to scratch that itch for you, I do not think. So like, I resent the fact that I think it is like purposely mismarketed to play to fangirls of Pride and Prejudice like me, or fanboys, whatever, who really like those retellings. I don't think it's delivering on that. Part the second, so when the book got started, I was sitting there thinking, okay, you know, the writing is a little rocky here. This is a little kind of info dumpy and like not the best start, but I thought this was an intriguing setup for what I thought was going to be an actual retelling, which is, okay, our Lizzie kind of character is a sports reporter. Her father is in jail, she is biracial, and she's got this assignment to go cover, I think it's a basketball team with, you know, the titular Mr. Darcy in the mix there. And so I was like, okay, this is a little rocky getting going, but sometimes people just don't know how to like smoothly enter a book. But no, like, when I tell you that those opening chapters are the highlight of this book, like the writing I think is not strong. I think that the plot has like, if I was more into the writing or the characters, maybe I could have given it a pass, but the plot has like a ton of holes in it. I think the characters are paper thinly drawn, and I mentioned she was biracial. Part of her biracial identity is that she is Asian and she has blue eyes, and there are like whole videos and threads explaining about this version of sort of like a racial trope for Asians, for biracial Asians. That annoyed me. And then the third of the things that I was just disappointed to realize is that the reason this book is getting pushed so hard is because it is co-written, ghostwritten, but maybe really truly written by her, because surely the ghostwriter would have like gone back and like cleaned things up. Apparently Evelyn Lozada is a celebrity, like a reality television celebrity, and like that is clearly why they got this book deal and why the publishers are pushing it so much. And that just like dynamic annoys me. So anyway, just all around this book let me down. And it's the rare book that I would tell you I just don't think you should spend your time on. However, different strokes for different folks. I am sure, I'm sure if we pulled up Goodreads right now, I would be able to tell you like all the people who loved this book. So like, I'm sure there are people out there who are going to enjoy it. It was not for me, and if your tastes are similar to mine, I strongly would steer you away from this one. It is the most disappointing, and I finished it. I finished it because frankly, I was like, I am not gonna let this book, normally I would DNF it, but because it was an arc, and I already feel pressure to go ahead and finish, but like, I also felt like, I will not let this be a mark against my NetGalley grade of having not finished a book. Like, I will not let this book be that book. So I kind of ended up a little bit hate reading it, which maybe wasn't the best spirit, but I was just annoyed. I was annoyed with the book by like the 30 to 40% mark, and it didn't really get better. So anyway, that was disappointing. And those are my disappointments. Okay, the good news is from here on out, I get to just squee about things to you because I read so many things that were either interesting or that I loved this month. So let's just get into that. Okay, all right, let's start with the two I mentioned in my mid-month check-in. First of all, Death Comes as the End from Agatha Christie. I thought was a surprise just because I just wasn't sure what to expect from it because it's a golden age detective whodunit classic mystery set in ancient Egypt. And I don't know, I talked more about it in my mid-month check-in, and I have a vlog that I'm doing of me finishing up the Christie canon. So at some point you'll see like my full thoughts. But I just wanted to mention that that was a surprise if you're somebody who hasn't read that one yet from Agatha Christie. It is still very Christie, but like in an ancient Egyptian setting, and that just creates an interesting reading dynamic, I think. So anyway, that one I thought was a interesting surprise. The other one I mentioned in my mid-month check-in that I wanted to say a little more about was Hidden by Laura Griffin. So if you read Laura Griffin, she writes these sort of procedural romantic suspense things that I think read more on the procedural suspense end really than the truly romance end of things. I mean, like, there always is a romantic element, like, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think that's sort of where the emphasis of that book's syllable really is. Her books tend to be more on the procedural end. She has a trope she is working with in this particular one. I think it's like the opening scene like really starts with a bang for that trope. And then like really, I thought played with, like it has a very climactic opening scene, like a very suspenseful opening scene. It's an opening scene that could be taking you in a few different sub-tropes of a suspense book. And I liked the sub-trope she picked to go with that opening scene. And then I liked the way that the pieces of that unfolded with the detectives versus with like getting POVs from like the witnesses or suspects or victims and the people involved. Like, I just thought that the way she handled that sub-trope was just like very engaging. And so it took what I think is probably a kind of middle of the road book and gave it like a little bit of extra interest for me. So I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. But anyway, I just wanted to mention, if you know what Laura Griffin does and you kind of like her project, I think you're gonna like this new series because this is the first in a new series, but it is just something a little bit different. So anyway, that one I thought was worth mentioning as a surprise. A surprise of a dark / taboo romance that I read this month was Stalking Her Sweetly by Mink. I put this in my Goodreads review, and let me just say it now. If you do not like romances that are like playing with very dark subversive tropes, you're not going to like this book, so don't pick it up. Like, if you're not into romances that like play with ideas of problematic gender dynamics or play with the history of the genre kind of, you're not gonna like this one. It's in the title. It's called Stalking Her Sweetly, and it is a romance between a woman and a man who you, the reader, know is stalking her, but she does not know that, and he also, you quickly realize, is a serial killer. I thought that this was a fascinating look at what readers are willing to forgive in romance heroes that we would never be okay with in real life, but then also that we don't forgive in other characters who are doing the same behavior. And I guess I probably will just leave it there, but I thought that this was a very, it kind of snuck up on me. At first I thought it was just campy, like kind of taboo nonsense. But by the end, I saw, I think, what Mink was trying to do with this one. And like, I don't know that I didn't love this. I gave it 3 stars, but like, I thought that I appreciated by the end being like, okay, I see what you did there. And this is like an interesting kind of meta commentary on the state of problematic gender dynamics and like problematic behavior in the romance genre. Like, cool. So I don't know. That's why I tend to like, I don't know that I often love Mink's books, but I always read them because I don't know what it is. They always have like a little point of interest like that make me like pause and be like, huh, okay, I see what you did there. That was interesting. So anyway, that was a surprise. Again, if you don't like a taboo or dark romance, please don't read this book. You will not like it. Oh, and then another surprise I just wanted to mention, I found 2 new authors actually this month in Kindle Unlimited that I'm enjoying. Michelle Mills writes these like very campy sci-fi like arranged marriage things between humans and aliens. That's been fun. Like I've been reading, what one did I read yesterday? Oh, His Human Nanny. That was kind of a fun one. The hero is an alien who looks like an actual Satan, like what we draw as like cartoon Satan. That is what the species of alien looks like. So anyway, that was fun. But a Kindle Unlimited author that I'm really, really enjoying, and I actually picked one of the books I read this month as our We Need Diverse Romance pick for next month. That one was Blind Date with a Book Boyfriend. I've already got the Discord up, the thread up if you're interested. But the one I wanted to mention that like started me with her was Bear With Me from Lucy Eden. I am really enjoying what I'm reading from Lucy Eden. They're fun, light, contemporary romance. I think that most of the ones I've read are around 150 to 200 pages. That's at least, I think she has longer ones, but those are the ones I've read so far. I just think she has a really light touch, and she has something in a contemporary romance author that I very much appreciate, which is that she communicates through her choice of conflicts, through the kinds of professions she gives her characters, through the different kind of family dynamics they have and sort of the demographics she gives them. Her books feel like romances written in 2020. In Bear With Me, that was like, it was her take on a shifter romance. And I just liked that the main character was a social media influencer, and I thought she handled that well, and just the kind of point of view she brought to a pretty standard version or flavor of a paranormal romance. I just liked her authorial voice and posture in it, and I found that consistently in her work. I've also found that she's obsessed with naming the heroes of her books Mike. I think almost every book I've read from her has a main, like the main guy who is the hero is named Mike. I think my favorite book from her is actually the prequel to Bear With Me, which is called Resolutions, but I actually think you should read Bear With Me before Resolutions, because Bear With Me's heroine is the ex in Resolutions, and I think it's better to meet her on her own terms. So anyway, I was really just very charmed by that book, and I've really enjoyed reading more from Lucy Eden. Like I said, I picked what I think will be a very like not the best contemporary romance I've ever read, but a very crowd-pleasing one for August for our We Need Diverse Romance book club. And yeah, I just have been enjoying getting into her backlist. So that was a delightful surprise. And then 2 books that I really, really enjoyed that I just put in the surprise category instead of the hit category for whatever reason. First, I did finally finish up The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. And guys, this is just such a charming book. It's not gonna be one for everyone. I mean, hardly any book is. But I think that this just has like such a lovely whimsy to its writing. It is a fantasy romance, and I didn't really realize it until I was pretty well into the book, but basically the romance trope in this is the nanny or teacher or outside like caregiving authority getting together with a single dad. So I thought that like once I realized that was sort of the trope that was being played with, I really love that. But what stands out in this book are the characters. I gave this 4 stars because I do have some pacing issues with the plot. That was the part that I struggled with the most in this, and I really wish that those were not there, because I think if about 80 pages had been trimmed out of this would have been a 5-star book. But the characters in this are just fantastic. Arthur is just like such a like dreamy single dad in his 40s. I like that the people getting together in this book are older too, which I think is great. But the kids in this, so the setup for this is that it is a orphanage for magically gifted youth. Our point of view character is basically like a social worker coming to evaluate the orphanage because they think the uppity ups think something might be going wrong, and they're trying to decide if the orphanage should stay open. And the kids at this orphanage are particularly dangerous or like very extreme in their magical abilities. One of the children in this is the Antichrist, Lucy. His name is Lucifer, and he goes by Lucy. He's a 6-year-old who is the devil. And he's so charming, but I loved all of these kids. The one that is my actual heart that made me literally cry multiple times in this book is Chauncey. Chauncey is some kind of like jellyfish, maybe. We don't really even know what Chauncey is. But his dream in life is to be a bellhop, and all he does is practice being a bellhop, and it makes me weep. It's so sweet. Theodore is adorable. Like, these kids are so precious, and like just TJ Klune's ability to paint characters who are just really invested in and are just completely charmed by, at least I was. I just thought that was really impressive. So I was very into this. I see why it's been getting so much hype, and I can't wait to read more from TJ Klune. Like, this has really whet my appetite for more. A delightful surprise, as was The Eighth Detective by Alex Pavassi. This is a 4.5-star book, which means it's a favorite of the year. And it should go in my hits bucket, but I put it in surprise because when I tell you that this mystery slow burned its way into my heart, and like when I mean slow burn in a mystery, I mean it's like not, I often use that term in reference to romance. In this case, what I mean is like, I wasn't really sure where this book was going. I wasn't really sure like how much I was gonna like it. It's basically a set of interconnected short stories with a framing device. And at first I was like, okay, these short stories are good. This framing device, I don't know how I feel about it. And then like I kept reading the short stories, and I should say I'm a sucker for short stories, so that probably helped. Also, these are all ostensibly set in like 1930s, 40s Britain, which is like classic golden age detective fiction time. This is technically historical fiction, I guess, because the framing device is set in the 60s and the stories are set in the 30s and 40s. So there you go. You know, I was getting into the short stories. This was like, it had a lot of the things I like. They're very classic whodunit kind of things. It definitely gives you some like Christie, Sayers, like that era vibe. I was like, okay, I'm liking this. Then we got to a locked room mystery, and I was like, I really like this locked room mystery. Then we got to a short story with an isolated closed circle mystery that was one of the most satisfying versions of that trope I've ever read. Like, that short story for me is a 5-star. Like, loved it. And then the framing device was also increasingly getting interesting. And by the time I got to the end, I just loved the way that this book is like, this is for mystery lovers. Like, this has such interesting things to like play with you as the reader about mystery tropes. It has setups that you can guess. And like, I did guess some of the setups, but then I think it had little turns within that I wasn't expecting. So it was like a really nice balance of like, I could guess some of these things, but it also gave me some surprises. Like, I just was so surprised that by the end of this book, I just was so into it and loved it. So 4.5 stars for that one. Honestly, I just sort of had heard about it in passing, and it was meta detective mystery stuff, and I tend to like that. So I was like, okay, cool. Like, I can get down with that. I'll see if I can get a copy of it. And I did, and I was so surprised at how much I love this book. So 4.5 stars there. It comes out on August 4th, so you'll be able to read it soon. And I personally really enjoyed it. As with everything, taste is subjective, but for my taste, this was like one of my favorite, like, written in contemporary times mysteries I've read in quite some time. And we come to the hits. So here's the thing. I had so many things I loved this month. It was difficult. Okay, I'm not gonna talk, I already talked about The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin in my mid-month check-in, so I'm not gonna say anything more about it other than 4 stars, really enjoyed this one. And yeah, N.K. Jemisin I think is just like a treasure of our time. She has such a distinctive writing voice and just a really distinctive point of view that I love. So that was a hit. I also talked, I think, a bit about Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade in my mid-month check-in. And it's a 4.5 star book for me. This is another favorite of the year. I really, really love what this book is doing kind of on a like thematic level. I think that what it does with fan culture is great. The setup is basically kind of a Game of Thrones-esque fandom, and one of the actors in that fandom secretly writes fanfic, and like has a friendship slash flirtation going on with like another fanfic writer, and then in real life, because reasons, they end up going on a date for a publicity thing. She doesn't know who he is, but he figures out who she is, and then they're starting to have this real relationship, and it's like a whole thing. And that, I just thought that the fandom bit was handled really well. It was really interesting and engaging. I loved the chemistry between the characters. I liked the themes. I think some of the plot points were a little tortured, and that was what kept this from being a full 5-star, because it did take me out of the stories at a couple of points. But overall, I just think the characters in this one are so charming, and so I just think this is gonna be a crowd pleaser. Like, this is the kind of book I can easily recommend to a lot of people. I think it has really good rep for plus size heroine. Like, I know people don't always get that right, and I think this book does that really well. I will say that was some of the plot torturedness in terms of like, I mean, I'm fat, I'm a plus size woman, whatever you want to call it. I prefer fat, but I know a lot of other plus size women don't like that, but whatever. Anyway, side note, I'm fat. So I related to some of her experiences, but I also thought some of the situations and like kind of like there's a lot of things like microaggressions or whatever you want to say that come with being a fat person, and especially a fat woman. I think some of those rang true to me, and others I thought, maybe I just know better, nicer people in real life, but I just don't think we're that like as plausible to me. So those were some of the points that took me out a little bit. Anyway, I really love this book. It was really good. It was really just fun, and I really loved reading all the fanfic stuff. It was just a delight. So I can't wait to read the next in that series. I think it's gonna be a good time. And yeah, it was just, it made me, it gave me a lot of the same like geeky love that Well Met by Jen DeLuca gave me last year. It was some of that same kind of energy. So anyway, 4.5 stars, love that one. 4 stars to Say No More by Karen Rose. Karen Rose, her pacing is fascinating. So she writes these romantic suspense books that I think mostly read, kind of like Laura Griffin, and this tends to be what I like in a romantic suspense. It mostly reads as a suspense, but it's got that romantic element thrown in there to kind of like spice things up a little bit. And that's how this one reads too. This book it needs so many content warnings, which I guess that can be the next one we talk about too. Actually, the next couple. So many content warnings on this one because it is about a woman who escaped an abusive marriage. She was a child bride, and her husband / abuser was incredibly violent towards her. She has a lot of trauma around that. I think that that's handled really respectfully and realistically, which I appreciated, but it gets into it. Like, that's like a meaningful part of her, like how she experiences the world and the plot and all that. So like content warning there. But this little mini series within her overall interconnected romantic suspense world, these ones that are set in Sacramento, it's all different mysteries having to do with a cult. And I really love all that, but the way she paces her books is basically that. Okay, sorry, my battery was dying, so I had to like plug it in, and I'm sure that this frame looks a little bit different because of that. Anyway, what was I saying? I think what is interesting about the way Karen Rose paces her books is that she has intense action followed by so much just like hanging out time. So the book opens with a bang, like the heroine is traveling back to Sacramento for reasons that you need to read the first book to understand, and there's an attempt by her former abuser to abduct her in the airport. Like, that is like basically the opening scene. Then you're chilling. Like, you're chilling in this house with all these characters, and like you're getting more information. There are revelations. Like, it's not that things aren't happening in terms of like moving the plot forward informationally, but in terms of the actual scene, I would venture to say that after they get to this house, they probably spend 100 pages of this 400 or 500 page book in this house just there. And it's just interesting because I never feel bored in her books. But like if I were gonna go like structurally break down what is happening in her books, it's just, on page, it feels like action, not a lot happening. You're learning a lot, but not a lot happening. Action, action, action. Okay, like learn. Like, it's just, it's a unique reading experience, something that I don't really get from other authors. And I like it. I appreciate it. But anyway, I just was struck again about that being a part of how she paces her books. I am really enjoying this like sub-series of her overall romantic suspense world. I can't wait for the next one. I'm really into like everything that's happening with the cult. Like I was really into this book. I didn't like it, I think, quite as much as I liked the first one, I will say, but I still felt like it was pretty comparable in quality. And if you've been looking forward to it, I think that you will not be disappointed. So 4 stars there. Another intense suspense book, thriller book, domestic, small town thriller, I guess is what I would call this, that I very much enjoyed. But oh boy howdy, do you need some content warnings on this, is The Night Swim by Megan Golden. Basically, this is I decided I wanted to read this because there was like this true crime podcast element happening with it. And that tends to be something that even if I don't like the rest of the book, I usually at least like that part of a thriller if it has like a true crime podcast thing happening. So that's why I picked it up. And I think that it's a really well done book, and actually think in terms of quality, in terms of characterization, plot, writing, themes, all of that, it probably deserves to be a 5-star. But emotionally, this book was just so much for me to get through, because the true crime case that the podcast host, who's one of our main point of view characters, is covering is this trial, like this rape trial that's going on. And I mean, I knew that. If you read the back cover, like that is clearly what's happening in this book. But the thing I want people to understand is that it's not just that that is happening, it's that this book has a very accurate, but very frankly, like triggering, if this is a part of your story, constant barrage of people playing out in real life what we see on Twitter about like accusing the victim, adjudicating the victim's past, downplaying the crime that happened, uplifting the future and whatever of the perpetrator. It is a lot to deal with, in my opinion, in terms of just the thematic content. It's really, the reason it's a lot to deal with is because it's really well done. But I just want to make sure before you pick this book up that you know that that is like, the book is examining those attitudes, like that is its project in a lot of ways. And there is a cold case that's also coming in that's really interesting and well done, like, and plays in thematically. Like, the whole book is really well done, and I'm actually frankly very excited. I have another book from her called The Escape Room on my TBR that I shamed my friend Bethany into giving me her copy of it last year at Book Net Fest, whatever. I'm really excited to get to that because I thought the writing was really good. I really liked this book, but it is very intense. And for me, that kept me from loving it. So I just want to make sure people know, like, that's the experience of reading the book, if just an awareness point. But it's great. It's very well done. And I have 3 left, and one of them is light and delightful, and 2 are also good but hard. Let's save the light one for the end. Let's end on a little more of a positive note. Even though it's a 4-star book, and the next 2 we're going to talk about were both 4.5 books. I had 4 4.5s this month, guys. It was a good reading month. Okay, first, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is a horror novel set in the white suburban South in the 90s. And thematically, this horror novel is dealing with white flight and the limitations of feminism that do not have an intersectional point of view. This book is another one. You need some content warnings. I put them all over in my Goodreads review, ones I think people should be aware of. I think this book is really well executed. Now, there is overt assault, racial violence, things like that portrayed in this book, domestic violence, and I've seen some people essentially saying that for them, they didn't feel like those things were problematized enough, or like that. Basically, I think some people think this book doesn't address those things enough. And I guess I would say I disagree. I think those things are portrayed very purposefully here. And especially because Grady Hendrix was on the panel I did for Social Distance Book Fest a few months ago, and just listening to him talk about his I think he's a very thoughtful author, and like I think that everything in here is here purposefully. And I felt like, especially, maybe I'm biased because I grew up in the white rich suburbs of the South, And in terms of the moms that I was around as a part of that, this just felt, it rang very true to me, I guess is maybe some of my bias here in terms of like the limitations, like what feminism can do for some women and not others, the limitation of our ability to have empathy for other people, like where we have failings of courage. This book also has a lot of icky horror elements to it that I think are great if you like horror, but just know that too. I just was completely sucked into this. I read this straight through in a day. I couldn't put it down. I thought the writing was great. It does have like darkly comedic elements. I thought this book was going to be funnier than I think it is. It's a pretty serious book in a lot of ways. And I just felt like it was a really, what I love in horror, sci-fi and fantasy is what they can do is bring metaphors. They can literalize metaphors. Like I guess they can make allegory. And I love it when books in those categories can do that really well or really effectively. And to my taste, to my mind, this is an example of that metaphor being literalized in a way that I thought was really incisive to a very specific cultural milieu that I recognize and could see how this was like taking that, like celebrating parts of it, but also like really taking parts of it like down a peg or two. So anyway, I thought that this was just super great. Couldn't put it down. Very much enjoyed. Please go read all the content warnings because it's a lot. And then another darkly funny one that I think is more funny. These are both dark, funny books. This one is both less funny and less dark, still really good. This is darker and funnier. This book is Nothing is Wrong and Here's Why by Alexandra Petrie. She is a columnist in the Washington Post whose satirical essays and articles and columns I've always enjoyed. Not read all of them, but like whenever I get to them in my feed, I enjoy them. I think seeing her work collected here, to me, this is one of those books that I'm like, the way people talk about Trick Mirror from Gia Tolentino last year, this is what I actually think this book is in terms of just like a generationally defining piece of nonfiction work. I mean, granted, it's not personal essays for the most part in the same way. Like it's not the same genre because these are cultural and political satire pieces as opposed to like self-reflective cultural essays. So it's not one-to-one, but just in terms of somebody who like captures, and like both of them have like a very specific feminist point of view, captures the horrors of being a woman since 2016 so perfectly. These books, like some of these literally made me laugh out loud. She has parodies in here. Like there's an essay that basically is the equivalent of maybe like Get Out between Michelle Obama and Melania Trump. That was really great. There's one about like the day Trump, and I think I remember reading this in her column, the day Trump actually becomes a stable genius and like how that like changes his perspective on everything. But even just the titles of these essays, let me just pick a few for you. This is not a crisis, Republicans say, as a large spider slowly devours them. A moderate speaks, by God, won't someone else take a stand? Keep Scott Pruitt moist. I'm beginning to suspect that these were not, in fact, the best people. My book report on the Mueller report. A humanizing profile of your local neo-Nazi. The Privilege Tree, which is an amazing send-up of the Giving Tree. Oh my God, that was so good. Like, there's so many just great, like, a good time to talk about gun laws. I'm sick of these children's demanding safe spaces. How to sleep at night when families are being separated at the border. Like, these are just so, like, they're very, I mean, they're written as weekly columns, a lot of them. Like, there's new work, but it's also some of, like, her best of. So they're very topical and, like, of the moment. And, like, this book will also remind you of, like, how much we have forgotten already in the last 4 years that's been horrifying. But, like, this book also literally made me cry at certain points because it's satire that is so real and just gets to the absurdity of something, and it literally just made me cry multiple times, just like reflecting on like, this is where we're at. How is this the timeline I'm living in? Whatever. So this book, it was a lot. I'm not gonna lie to you, but it is. Okay guys, my camera overheated. So I took a break and ate some lunch. This is the first time I'm filming on this new camera, and yeah, I don't know, maybe picking a super long video to try it out with was not the best plan. Anyway, I was in the middle of talking about this. I don't remember really what I was saying. I think I've gotten to the point where I was saying it is very, very funny, but very dark, and I loved it. 4.5 stars. One of my favorites of the year. And let's finish out with something that is not one of my favorites of the year. I mean, it is right now on my best of SFF list, but I really did enjoy it. I know that it is a fave here on BookTube, and I'd always heard it was great, and then recently with like things in the news, I was reminded of like why apparently Rick Riordan is like a much better author to put your investment in, at least based on what we know right now. I read The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan, which is the first in the Percy Jackson series, and I found it so fun. I can totally see why this became like such a beloved hit. I actually just got the second book as audio, and I think that's what I'm gonna do, is just like get online at the library and have this like just go through the series, because I really like the first one, so I'm gonna at least keep going for this first little arc. And it is like it was and wasn't what I was expecting. Like, it's very action packed, so I can see in terms of like for middle grade readers, and I think Rick Riordan, if I remember rightly, wrote this for his son who was dyslexic, and I think like struggled to like focus or like pay attention in books. And like this has a lot of action. It moves very quickly. I can see how this would keep the attention of maybe like a reluctant reader. I could see how this would be a good pick for them. I will say I almost put this in the surprise category, because like, so if you know anything about Greek myth, like half of them are just about like adultery or sexual assault of some kind. And I have to say, I kind of love that we now have like this beloved middle grade series that completely normalizes like, I guess like open relationships or polyamory. Like everybody's parents, like there's all these like half siblings at this camp. It's completely normal for these gods to like, you know, be fucking all over the place. Like I kind of, for a middle grade series, I was like, the the sexual politics of this are incredibly progressive. Or, you know, I guess maybe we're just coming back to the world of the ancient Greeks in terms of loosening up the reins a little bit on some of our more Victorian mores. But anyway, I thought that was kind of a delightful, I was surprised that it went there, but I love that it did. So yeah, all around, I thought this was so fun. If you've never read the series, I'm sure I'm like the last person to read this, but if you've never read it and you've wondered like, is it worth all the hype? I think this one is super fun, and I can totally see why people like, why it's such a beloved hit of middle grade classicness. So I'm going to keep going in that series, and we'll end on that more positive, happy note. That was one of the more positive, happy books I read this month. So there you go. And with that, I think that wraps up my July reading. Like I said, it was one of a lot of hits and high points, some passionate low points, but yeah, this was a great reading month. I'm hoping I'm going to keep that same energy going into August. And yeah, I think that will do it for now. So definitely let me know below what one of your favorite books that you read in July was, or if you have any thoughts about the books that I talked about, definitely let me know in the comments below. And anything else I need to tell you? Oh yeah, housekeeping wise, in a second you're going to hear me mention things listed in the description box below. I've decided that along with the, I've started putting a link to register to vote in my description box as a reminder to folks that if you are not registered to vote, at least here in the US, we are less than 100 days away from our federal elections. And along with that link, I'm also going to start putting just like some kind of like informational media that I have enjoyed recently. You know, maybe a podcast episode or a YouTube video I liked or an article or whatever. And that is because I'm somebody who does, you know, I really enjoy nonfiction media in all forms, not just book form. I really like podcasts and documentaries and things like that. So, and I find like especially the conversations that you can kind of encounter in those different formats can be really instructive and like open you up to like new potential like nonfiction book ideas that you might have in terms of things you're interested in. Or if you're somebody who doesn't really like nonfiction books but want to like kind of learn more about like relevant topics or whatever. Anyway, all that to say, I get questions about that sometimes, so I'm going to start leaving with that link to register to vote just some like media items of interest of kind of a current events, analyzing history variety. So yeah, just FYI, housekeeping there. Anyway, with all that being said, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, along with a link to register to vote and some secret links of the day. And yeah, I think that will do it for now. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!